I was 32 years old when 4 words rewrote my entire childhood. They came from my Aunt Diane's mouth 3 days before she died, in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and something sweeter underneath that I didn't want to identify. She'd been unconscious for most of the week. The doctors said her liver was shutting down. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to hospice. My mother had been there every day, sleeping in the chair by the window, but she'd gone home that Tuesday afternoon to shower and change clothes. I'd promised to sit with Diane while she was gone. I didn't expect Diane to wake up. I was scrolling through my phone, half watching a nurse check the 4 bag, when I heard this rattling breath. Different from the others. Diane's eyes opened, but they weren't really focused. The nurse moved closer, checking her pupils with a pen light. "Diane," she said softly. "Can you hear me?" Diane's hand moved on the blanket. Her fingers were so thin. I'd never noticed how much weight she'd lost until that moment, seeing her hand against the white hospital sheets. She turned her head slightly toward me. I don't know if she saw me or just sensed someone was there. Her lips moved. The nurse leaned in. "What was that, honey?" "She protected you from him." 4 words. Well, 5 if you count the preposition. The nurse looked at me with this gentle expression, like people say all kinds of things on morphine, "Don't worry about it." "I'll give you 2 some privacy," she said, and left. I sat there. My hand was still holding my phone, but I'd completely forgotten what I'd been looking at. Diane's eyes had closed again. Her breathing went back to that shallow, rhythmic pattern. "She protected you from him." I played it back in my head, making sure I'd heard right. The room was very quiet except for the machines. There was a window, but the blinds were partially closed, and the light coming through made these horizontal stripes across her bed. I should have called the nurse back. I should have asked Diane what she meant, who him was, what protected meant. But I just sat there. My mother had 2 siblings, Diane, who never married, who worked at the post office for 30 years, who came to our house every Sunday for dinner but never said much, and Uncle Frank, who died in a car accident when I was 4. I barely remembered him. There were maybe 3 photos of him in our house, all in albums my mother kept in the hallway closet. My childhood was normal. Boring, even. Mom and Dad, married for 35 years now, living in the same house in Ohio since before I was born. Dad worked in insurance. Mom was a paralegal, then stayed home after I was born, then went back part-time when I started school. I was an only child. We went to church on Sundays, had family dinners, took 1 vacation a year to the same lake in Michigan. My parents argued sometimes, normal stuff about money or whose turn it was to pick me up from soccer practice, but they always made up. They kissed each other goodbye every morning. They still held hands. "She protected you from him." I looked at Diane's face. She was 58. She'd always seemed older to me, maybe because she wore her hair in the same short, practical cut for as long as I could remember, because she dressed like someone who'd given up on impressing anyone. But looking at her in that hospital bed, I could see she must have been pretty once. The shape of her face, her bone structure. It was like my mother's face, actually, but softer somehow. My mother came back an hour later with a Starbucks cup and a paper bag from Panera. "Any change?" she asked, setting her purse down. I almost told her. The words were right there. Diane woke up. She said something. But I looked at my mother's face, at the exhaustion there, the way her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and I just shook my head. No change. That night, lying in bed at my apartment 40 minutes away, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to logic it out. Maybe Diane meant my father, maybe there was something I didn't know about him, some affair or some period of unemployment or drinking that my mother had shielded me from. But that felt wrong. Diane had said him, not your father. She'd said it like I should know who she meant. I got up and made tea I didn't drink. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen. What was I going to do? Google, who did my mother protect me from? I thought about texting my mother, asking casual questions. Hey, what was Uncle Frank like? But it was 2 in the morning, and anyway, what would I say if she asked why I was asking? The thing about memories is that you don't realize how much you've constructed them until something makes you look at them differently. I started thinking about my childhood, really thinking about it, and it was like watching a movie where someone suddenly tells you the main character was dead the whole time. Everything looked the same, but it meant something else. I called in sick to work the next day. I taught 9th grade English at a public school 20 minutes from where I grew up, and I had a sub who could cover. I told them I had a family emergency, which wasn't a lie. I drove to my parents' house. My father was at work. My mother was at the hospital. I'd texted her that morning to check, casual, asking if she needed anything. I let myself in with my key. The house smelled like it always did, Tide detergent and the vanilla candles my mother bought in bulk from HomeGoods. I stood in the entryway for a minute, just breathing it in. This was the house where I'd grown up. I knew every floorboard that creaked, every light switch that sparked a little when you flipped it. The wallpaper in the downstairs bathroom was the same ugly floral pattern that had been there since 1987. I went to the hallway closet where my mother kept the photo albums. There were 12 of them, organized by year, starting from my parents' wedding in 1989. I pulled out the ones from the early 90s, from before I was born and just after. I sat on the floor in the hallway and started looking. There he was. Uncle Frank. 3 photos in the 1990 to 1992 album, 2 in the 1993 to 1995 one. In the first photo, he was at what looked like a 4th of July barbecue, holding a beer, squinting at the camera. He was younger than I'd remembered, maybe mid-20s. He had dark hair, my mother's same nose. He was standing next to Diane, and they both looked uncomfortable, like someone had insisted on the photo. In the second photo, Frank was holding me. I was maybe 2 years old, wearing a yellow dress I didn't remember. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. My mother was in the background, slightly out of focus, and she was looking at him, at us, with an expression I couldn't quite read. The third photo was at a Christmas, I think. Frank was sitting on the couch. I was on the floor with some toys. My father wasn't in the picture. Diane was there, standing in the doorway like she was about to leave. I took out my phone and photographed each picture. Then I put the albums back exactly where I'd found them. I sat in my car in my parents' driveway for 20 minutes, looking at the photos on my phone, zooming in on faces. What was I looking for? Evidence of what? The photos didn't tell me anything except that Frank had existed, that we'd been in the same room together, that my mother had let him hold me. I drove to the library. I don't know why, maybe because I couldn't go home, couldn't go back to the hospital, couldn't sit still. I went to the reference section and asked the librarian how to access old newspaper archives. She showed me how to use the microfiche machine, which I'd never used before. I felt ridiculous, like a detective in a bad movie. I started with the car accident. I remembered it was in April, 1996. I was 4. I searched through April and May of that year. I found it on April 19th, page 3 of the local section. Man dies in single vehicle crash. Frank Joseph Morrison, 29, of Warren, Ohio. Lost control of his vehicle on Route 45, struck a tree. Died at the scene. Survived by his mother, Dorothy Morrison, and sisters, Diane Morrison and Catherine Morrison Hayes. Services at Shepherd's Funeral Home. Single vehicle crash. I read it 3 times. I didn't know what I was expecting, some detail that would explain everything, some hint of foul play or suspicious circumstances. But it was just a car accident. People died in car accidents. I kept scrolling backward through the months before his death. I don't know what I was looking for. I went back a year, then 2. I found his name one more time, in a brief from November 1994. Man arrested in domestic disturbance. Frank Morrison, 27, arrested following a disturbance at a residence on Oak Street. No other details. Released on bond. I sat back in the uncomfortable library chair. The microfiche screen glowed in front of me. A domestic disturbance. That could mean anything. It could be a fight with a girlfriend, a landlord dispute, anything. But I was already building a story in my head, and I hated myself for it. I didn't know the address where Frank had lived. I didn't know if he'd ever been married, if he'd had a girlfriend. I realized I knew almost nothing about him. My mother never talked about him. When I was little, if I asked about Uncle Frank, she'd just say he died in an accident and change the subject. I'd assumed it was too painful for her to discuss. I'd never pushed. I thought about Diane in that hospital bed. She protected you from him. Not she kept you safe. Not she took care of you. Protected. Like there was something specific to protect me from. I drove back to my apartment. It was 4 p.m. I had 16 missed calls from my mother. Diane had died at 2:47 p.m. I didn't cry at first. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building and called my mother back. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. "Where were you?" she kept asking. "I needed you there." "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry. I'm coming now." I drove back to the hospital. My mother was in the waiting room with my father. She stood up when she saw me and just collapsed into my arms, and then I was crying too, but I wasn't sure what I was crying about. Diane was dead. The only person who could tell me what she'd meant was gone. The funeral was on Saturday. It rained, which felt almost too perfect, like someone was directing a movie and wanted to make sure we all knew this was the sad part. The service was at the same funeral home where they'd held Frank's service 29 years earlier. I wondered if my mother was thinking about that. Diane didn't have a lot of friends. She'd never been married, no kids, spent most of her life working and coming to our Sunday dinners. There were maybe 30 people at the service. Co-workers from the post office, a couple of neighbors, some second cousins I'd met twice. My mother gave the eulogy. She talked about how Diane was always there, always steady, always put family first. She talked about their childhood, growing up in the same house where my grandmother still lived until she died in 2008. She talked about how Diane loved crossword puzzles and murder mystery novels and had never missed a Sunday dinner in 28 years. She didn't mention Frank. At the reception afterward, in the funeral home's basement cafeteria with its fluorescent lights and folding tables, I stood next to a woman I didn't recognize. She was maybe 60, wearing a black dress that looked expensive. She introduced herself as Marie, said she'd worked with Diane at the post office for 15 years. She was a good woman, Marie said, holding a paper plate with a cookie she wasn't eating. Never complained. Always kept to herself, but she was kind, you know? I think she was lonely sometimes. I wanted to ask this stranger if Diane had ever mentioned anything about protecting someone, about keeping secrets, but I just nodded. She came to dinner every Sunday at our house. She talked about that, Marie said. She loved those dinners. She said your mother was the strong one, always had been. The strong one. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I locked the stall door and sat on the closed toilet lid and tried to breathe. What was I doing? Diane was dead. My mother was upstairs grieving. And I was in a funeral home bathroom building conspiracy theories about my own childhood based on 4 words from a dying woman on morphine. Maybe it didn't mean anything. Maybe Diane was confused. Maybe she thought I was someone else. Maybe. But I knew. Somehow, in a way I couldn't explain, I knew she'd meant what she said. She'd been waiting to say it, maybe for years, and she'd had one last moment of clarity before the end. She protected you from him. I went back upstairs. My mother was talking to the funeral director, arranging for Diane's ashes to be picked up next week. My father was by the coffee station, looking uncomfortable in his dark suit. I watched them from across the room, these people who'd raised me, who'd given me a safe, normal, boring childhood. I tried to imagine my mother protecting me from something, from someone, and never telling me. I tried to imagine what that would take, what kind of strength or fear or love would make you carry that secret for decades. "You okay, honey?" My father appeared next to me with 2 cups of coffee, handed me one. "I know this is hard." "I'm fine," I said automatically. Then, because I couldn't help myself, "Dad, what was Uncle Frank like?" He looked surprised. "Frank? Why are you asking about Frank?" "I don't know. I've been thinking about him. I barely remember him." My father sipped his coffee. "He was troubled, I think. Your mother didn't talk about him much, even before he died. They weren't close." "What do you mean, troubled?" "I don't know the details. He had a temper, I think. Got into some scrapes." "Why?" I shook my head. "Just curious." But my father was still looking at me with this odd expression, like he was trying to figure out what I was really asking. "Your mother went through a lot with him," he finally said. "Before we got married, before you were born. It was hard on her. I think she was relieved when he moved away, honestly. Then when he died, she felt guilty about that." "He moved away?" "For a couple years. Lived in Kentucky or Tennessee, I think. Came back in 95, maybe 96. Died not long after." The timeline was assembling itself in my head. The arrest in 1994. Then he left. Then he came back in 1995 or 96. I was born in 1993. Those photos of him holding me, I'd assumed they were taken over several years, but maybe they were all from the same brief period. Maybe after he came back. "Did he ever live with Grandma?" I asked. "For a while, yeah. After his divorce." "He was married?" My father looked at me. "You really don't know any of this, do you? Your mother really never talked about it." "No." He sighed. "Frank was married in his early 20s. It didn't last long. There were problems, I don't know what kind. Your mother doesn't like talking about it. After the divorce, he lived with your grandmother for a while, then he took off. When he came back, he lived in an apartment somewhere. Then the accident." I wanted to ask more, but my mother was walking toward us, her face blotchy from crying. "I'm ready to go home," she said quietly. I hugged her. She felt so small in my arms. I thought about her at 26, 27, with a baby and a brother who was troubled, who had a temper, who'd been arrested for a domestic disturbance. I thought about Diane, unmarried, watching from the edges of our family, knowing something. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the photos, about the expression on my mother's face in the background. About Diane standing in doorways. It's been 3 months. I still don't know what to do with what I know, or what I think I know. I've driven past my grandmother's old house twice, the one where Frank lived after his divorce. It's painted a different color now, has different people living in it. I've reread that newspaper article about the domestic disturbance so many times I have it memorized. I've looked at those photos until I can see them when I close my eyes. I haven't asked my mother. I can't figure out how to start that conversation. "Hey Mom, what did Diane mean when she said you protected me from Frank?" It feels like detonating a bomb in the middle of our relationship. What if I'm wrong? What if it meant nothing? What if it meant something, but it's something my mother has spent 30 years trying to forget, and I'm about to drag it all back? I go to Sunday dinner still. I sit at the same table where Diane used to sit, in her spot by the window. My mother makes pot roast or lasagna. My father asks about work. We talk about normal things, my lesson plans, their plans to repaint the kitchen, whether it's going to snow this week. And the whole time, I'm looking at my mother's hands as she passes the bread basket, watching her smile at something my father says, and I'm wondering what she's never told me. Sometimes I think I see it, a shadow behind her eyes, a hesitation before she answers a question. But maybe I'm just projecting. Maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there because I want the story to make sense. I found one more thing last week. I was going through some boxes in my closet and found an old birthday card from when I turned 5. It was from Aunt Diane. The message inside was generic, "Happy birthday, love Aunt Diane," but there was a PS in smaller handwriting at the bottom, "You're safe now." I was 5 in 1998. Frank had been dead for 2 years. You're safe now. I keep that card in my bedside table. Sometimes late at night I take it out and look at it, trying to decode what it means, trying to figure out what I'm safe from. But Diane's gone. Frank's gone. And my mother is in her kitchen making pot roast, humming along to the radio, carrying whatever she's carrying. I don't know if I'll ever ask. I don't know if I want to know the full story, if there even is one. Maybe those 4 words were enough. Maybe some protections work best when they stay invisible. But I carry them with me now, those 4 words. They've changed everything and nothing. My childhood looks the same in my memory, but it feels different, like a photograph that's been slightly out of focus this whole time and I'm only now noticing. I still don't know what my mother protected me from, or how, or why Diane waited until her last conscious moments to tell me. I just know that she did. And I know that I'm grateful and angry and confused and sad, all at the same time. And I know that every Sunday, when my mother sets an extra plate at the table out of habit before remembering Diane won't be coming anymore, I see her face change for just a second before she puts the plate back in the cupboard. I'll never know if it was better to hear those 4 words or not. But I can't unhear them now. They're part of me, part of my story, even if I never learn what they truly meant. She protected you from him. I'm 32 years old, and I'm still trying to figure out what that means. Maybe I always will be.